Hello, everyone. Welcome to day 5 of the Level Up Symposium. My name is Andrew Scriver, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to the Pedagogy of Digital Creation panel presented by the Associated Designers of Canada with support from Toaster Lab's Mixed Reality Performance Atelier. I am one of the co-curators of the symposium and a member of the ADC, and I am really excited to be your moderator for this event. So I'd like to first acknowledge that I am coming to you from the settler city of Montreal, which long before colonizers arrived was a place of conference, conflict, and creativity for many Indigenous peoples, including the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, and Abenaki peoples. This land is known by the current caretakers of the land, the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation, as Tchag'é, which means broken in two because of the way the St. Lawrence River breaks around the island. I am honored and humbled to be able to be here and create and share with you all, and so I offer my thanks. And thus, in this spirit of gratitude, I'd also like to acknowledge the support of the Canada Council for the Arts, which is our primary funder of the symposium, as well as our other sponsors, IATSE, University of British Columbia, Theatre Alberta, CITT Alberta Chapter, Concordia University, Ryerson University, York University, and all of our individual donors. Thank you so much. So for your information, all of our symposium events are being recorded and presented and will be freely available in an archive on our website within a few days of the event. So please, if you've missed it, check back there or you want to watch it again. Thank you for joining us today, everyone. So you're watching this live stream either on the Level Up website, levelup.designers.ca, on HowlRound at howlround.com, or through our partners at Toaster Lab on the respective Facebook pages of the ADC or Toaster Lab. Regardless of your viewing platform, embedded on the same page as the video is the chat function in the upper right corner of your screen. You can click on that and put questions in there asked at any time, and they will be read out to the presenters. This event can be enjoyed through auditory or visual access or a combination of both. And I will read aloud all the questions that we address from the chat. This information will also appear visually at the bottom of your screen. Visual access is also supported by captioning, as you can see. Captioning will appear directly below all of our active speakers. If you require any technical assistance or support at any time, please feel free to email levelup@designers.ca for immediate support or to provide feedback following our events. Now, if you enjoyed this session or any of our other sessions, please consider donating any amount that you can to the Associated Designers of Canada to support our National Arts Service Organization in achieving its goals of advocacy, mentorship, and industry promotion. Donation links are available on all viewing platforms on our website, the ADC's website, or canadahelps.org. So please consider donating. Thank you, everyone, for your patience with our announcements. So it's now my incredible honor to welcome our guests to this event. So first up, we have Andrea Lundy, who is an award-winning lighting designer and production manager who has worked professionally across Canada and internationally for 35 years and has been the Director of Production Design and Technical Arts Program at the National Theatre School of Canada for the last 10 years. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a great pleasure to be here. So I'm here not only as a designer and somebody who's been around the industry for many, many years and seen many changes, but now as an educator. So I'm incredibly invested in this conversation. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks. Our next guest is Matthew Ragan, who is a interactive systems designer and a technology director, who's also worked as an educational outreach counselor and as a faculty developer. Welcome, Matthew.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Our third guest is Amelia Scott, who is a video designer, projection technologist, and new media artist, who is also an instructor of video technology and design at the National Theatre School of Canada. Welcome, Amelia.
Hello. Happy to be here.
Welcome. Our fourth guest is Maziar Ghaderi, who is a multimedia artist, an educator, and director that works with film, interactive multimedia, and has also taught media production and conceptual development at Artscape, OCAD, and Ryerson University. Welcome, Maz.
Hey, everybody. Good to be here.
Thanks. Our final guest, last but not least, Ian Garrett is a designer, producer, and researcher in the field of sustainability and arts and culture, and is also an associate professor of ecological design for performance at York University. Welcome, Ian.
Hi, great to be here.
Great. So we have a big panel today, lots of interesting conversations to be had. So we're just going to start off. Everyone can give a little bit of an introduction about themselves and about their process and where they're at in their lives these days. So Matthew, why don't we start with you?
Wonderful. Thank you for this opportunity. So, I have a kind of interesting pathway to this kind of work. I started as an actor, dancer, circus performer. That was my history in this world, was kind of on the other side of some of the stage technology elements as a performer. And then I left. I transitioned out of the kind of performance portion of my life. I worked as an educational outreach counselor in New England for about 5 years before becoming a faculty developer and thinking about what my kind of future trajectories might look like. So in that process, I left the work I was doing as a faculty developer and then became a student once again at Arizona State University in a program that was kind of specifically targeted at the intersection of live performance and new technologies. I was involved in a program called Interdisciplinary Digital Media Arts and Performance. So half my time was in the context of theater and live events, and then the other half of my time was in a more abstract kind of how do we reconcile and think and dream about the tools that don't exist that we wish existed. After that journey, I transitioned out into industry and worked for a company called Obscura Digital for a number of years before we were acquired by the Madison Square Garden company. And then just recently, I left the position I had there as a director of real-time rendering technologies to start a small company with a few other colleagues and friends. Throughout that whole trajectory, I've done a lot of work to try and think about how to help other people find their way into this space. It's interesting in that it is incredibly intimidating, the kind of volumes of content that you need to understand and the context that you need to be aware of to think of yourself as a media designer, projectionist, AR artist, VR artist. So many of those pieces are overlapping and interwoven. And so I've done my very best through this time to continue to make educational resources and materials available, specifically around the platform called Touch Designer, which is a toolkit similar to the kind of Unity and Unreal worlds that has a kind of combination of 2D, 3D, and interface style elements that are available to users and developers. That's a little bit about where I am these days. I continue to make and write tutorials, and then I participate in forums and a number of other kind of educational outlets and opportunities to try and help others find their way into this work. Because how you find and navigate this particular industry is a very tumultuous and often kind of rocky place. And helping to demystify how this work is actually accomplished is, I think, something that's valuable for all of us. I think we benefit from a world where the contributors to our collective dreaming aren't all uniform in the way that they present and look. And so the more diversity of perspective, opinion, and background that we have creating, making, and helping us dream collectively about the imaginary worlds, virtual worlds that we explore, I think is really important and essential.
Great. Thank you, Matthew. That's wonderful. Andrea, why don't you follow up with that?
Great. Nice to hear all that. My particular journey is through production stream, but also a design stream. So I'm a production manager and lighting designer and have been for many, many years, mostly in Toronto. And then 10 years ago, I took a career path that totally changed my perspective on the industry, but also on the potential of the industry. And I accepted a position at the National Theatre School of Canada. And I'm the director of the Production Design and Technical Arts program. And at that time, I had witnessed over 30 years, a lot of changes in technology. And while I really thoroughly enjoyed watching that and being a part of it and taking my own artistic creative endeavors deeper into the technology, I also realized that I wanted to step back and help the next generation work within the theater industry and foster a love of the work. And so my particular perspective today is framed around that, because it is directly educating students who will go into either design or management stream. So at the school, in the program, we cover 6 disciplines. There are 3 management positions: technical director, production manager, and stage manager. And then there are 3 designs: lighting design, sound design, and video design. And video design had not been in the curriculum until I started, basically, because it was just on the cusp of being added into the performances at the school. And I added that 6th discipline when I started, because there is obviously a direct need to train people to think this way, to work this way within a theatrical context. So my role over these 10 years has been to begin and continually develop curriculum for projection design, and to kind of grapple with a number of things, many of which I'll speak to today, because it is my direct experience, is really how do small institutions prepare people for the work in the community. And my main goal is really to help teach the core functionality of the work, really, which is a dramaturgical approach to working in theater. And then how do we teach the technology and the design, and what can we do in 3 years? Because there's a lot to do in those 3 years with 6 disciplines. So at the school, I have 24 students generally, 8 per year, 3 years of study, and all of them are doing all 6 disciplines together. Nobody specializes really, maybe a little bit in the 3rd year, but they kind of move forward together, discovering each of those disciplines. And so I'm super interested in how that can carry forward, how that can change, how that can keep growing within the sort of the complex system that we have, and the crunch of time and money that we have. So that's, I think, my perspective today. It's purely pedagogical, but based on a love of and a need to support the theater community across Canada.
Great. Thank you very much, Andrea. And thank you for all your work, because I wouldn't be here, and probably this symposium wouldn't be here, maybe not, if you hadn't done what you've done.
Oh my gosh, it would be. It's just
somebody else would be doing it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And on that note, to another NTS grad, Amelia, why don't you tell us about your work?
Yeah, so I'm a video designer, but I was my first year at NTS. I was a student at NTS. I started the school Andrea's first year, so it's been kind of a cool relationship to have gone through the program as Andrea was getting her start and kind of shaping her vision of how that program would be, to then have graduated, left for a few years, been working out in the industry, and I've now been teaching at the school for 4 years. So it's been cool to see that process and to have come back and see what Andrea's done with the program, you know, from where it left off when I was a student there. And my focus at the school, you know, as Andrea said, video was just becoming part of the curriculum when she started at the school, or she was making it part of the curriculum. So I really benefited from that, because when I came to the school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do afterwards. I had had some experience doing some filmmaking. I always had an interest in animation. But I didn't really know that video design, projection design for theater was a thing until I came to NTS and I was exposed to that. I had opportunity to do a small design in my first year, and I was like, oh, great. This uses all the things I love about filmmaking and all the things I love about theater. And it was just kind of like, for me, it was like, oh, no brainer. That's what I want to do. So that was certainly kind of what I was really passionate about. But as it is this sort of conservatory program, you know, you learn all 6 disciplines. And after NTS, I went to the Banff Center for a summer. I did a practicum in projection technology, which was a really great experience to kind of take what I had started to learn at NTS and get more in-depth focus into the discipline. It was about 3 months that I was there at the Banff Center. And that really, like, I felt like I'm not a super technological person. I'm not a very like computery person inherently, and I was really intimidated by the technology when I started. You know, I love the artistry, but I didn't necessarily know how to execute my ideas. And so the time at the BAM Center really just allowed me to actually get my hands on all of the components and dive in more in depth and realize that it's actually not that complicated. It's intimidating, but once you're in it, it's not that that difficult once you kind of learn the basics of it. Anyway, so I've over the years been working as a video designer. That's pretty much my main shtick these days, but also as like a projection technician, projection technologist, and yeah. I'm back at NTS. This is my 4th year teaching there, and I'm really like, I teach the first year production design and technical arts students. My class is Intro to Video Technology and Design. So my focus there is really what are the things I didn't learn when I was at school, and passing it on to them to give them that good foundation, that introduction to the hardware and the software in a way where we just learn what are the ins and outs, how does this all work together, what are the incompatibilities that we need to know about, and to also give them kind of exposure to the theater ecology in Canada. What does video design in Canadian theater look like today on the different scales of stages that we have? So that's what I'm up to.
Okay, thanks, Amelia. That's I mean, I was the year after you, so I have a very similar kind of learning process, and I feel like I didn't know about projection design either, and that the school kind of opened my eyes in really wonderful ways to that and everything else that we learned there. So it's really great to hear you speak about that. Thank you. Let's jump on to Maz. Why don't you tell us what you've been up to?
Yeah, so my kind of spiel started out first. Well, my family came as immigrant refugees to Canada during the Iran-Iraq War, and I always kind of had an interest in the arts. But my parents were like, "We didn't come halfway around the world for you to study art," you know. So they wanted me to study economics. I went to study art, so we compromised on marketing. So I did that right out of high school. It was all right. But then I ended up, you know, kind of opened my head and met some older people, and I ended up teaching English in Brazil for a few years, and that kind of developed my love for teaching, and it kind of really opened up my head to kind of being like, you know, life is short. If I want to do creative work, that's what I should do. And so I'm self-taught in media production, videography, motion graphics, so doing that stuff on a corporate level to pay for the bills. And also teaching English in Brazil started my love for teaching. Then when I came back to Canada, I watched some theater. I went to Death of a Salesman, and then I loved the play so much, and it was such an immigrant story. It related to my dad's story a lot. But when I would look around the audience, I would see a lot of people, it wasn't very diverse. So then I brought my dad. He loved it, and then he introduced me to this guy who ran a Iranian newspaper, and I started to write a column for their English section in the back of the paper, which is our front, and just reviewing plays to try to kind of get more Iranian or Farsi-speaking reading people coming out to watch theater. And so I kind of started to develop a kind of like, what was my interest in all of this? And then I ended up coming to Toronto. This is all in Vancouver. I came to Toronto for grad school at OCAD in the Digital Futures program. That was a master's in design. And I learned what an Arduino was. So it's, for those of you who don't know, it's a microprocessor, physical computing, you put sensors in it. So I started to look at how I can use that stuff for ideas that I had. So I started to use it for Sufi whirling. I started to use it for a capoeira show. So I started to develop my own artistic practice, which I called Playformance. And I'm doing an artist talk with you lovely folks on the 10th. So if you want to know more about that, you can come check that out. But basically, Playformance was the idea of using interactive tech to disseminate cultural and tangible practices with those communities to create metaphors, epiphanies, and critiques. I did it with Inuit throat singing, Zoroastrian creation stories. Fast forward to last year, I started teaching at Artscape in a course I designed called New Media Guerrilla, which is all about using the stuff that I learned just hands-on, self-taught, in a really kind of guerrilla, kind of hacky, in a kind of hack into it sort of way, for a lot of emerging and BIPOC artists. It's a program. It's the Daniel's Launchpad Bursary program. It's for emerging and BIPOC students or people that are interested to learn that kind of craft. And I'm currently doing that. It lasts until March. And so that's kind of a little bit about me in terms of art design, live performance, and then teaching it through 2 different communities that I didn't see really reflected in the audience, let alone the stage, and blending it all together to kind of create what ended up being my artistic practice that I love sharing and inspiring the next generation with. So happy to be here.
Thanks, Maz. That's really great. Your work is very inspiring, and I'm really looking forward to your talk. It's really great. Thanks for being here. And lastly, Ian, let's jump to you.
Hi, it's great to be here. My background, like in recent time, I've taken to realizing that I can bring I'm one of those people who can bring my background. I was like, I was 5 years old. I realized that in our shift to like online digital work that's streaming, my dad did multi-camera video directing when I was a kid. And so I was like, oh, I just do what my dad did now, which was one of the reasons to bring it up is because I actually thought I tried to avoid that. I'm originally from the States. I grew up in California, and I moved to Texas to study architecture and got sucked into theater, which was already a step back towards that like entertainment industry past, familial past. And in doing that, there was that's where like 2 strands of my practice came from. One is around sustainability and sustainable development and how that applies to design. And the other part of that was the integration of technology. So there's a lot of early rendering that was towards architectural modeling. And then I just started playing with it as I was working as an early theater professional at a university that didn't have a theater degree. So I got all the opportunities because no one else wanted to do it. So I was willing to do primarily lighting and video from an early phase, and then went out, started freelancing that, spent a couple of seasons in lighting departments. I went to grad school at CalArts, moving back to Los Angeles, and overlapped quite a bit with the video world. There's an integrated media program there, a lot of experimental work that's happening there, and just got really into a lot of media work at the time, as it was a very familiar thing, and I was very comfortable with cameras and such, and started working around. It's when I co-founded one of the first companies I was involved with, called MPG Interactive Arts, where we did a lot of work, basically built in Max around interactive sound mazes and things like that. We spent a lot of time breaking. Shortly after QLab 2 was released, I remember getting an email from Chris Ashworth there asking, what the hell are you doing? Because of the number of tickets that were coming from a show that myself and a collaborator that I worked with frequently at the time, Dave Mickey, were creating. So it's always been about sort of hitting the integration of technology into the practice. As I worked in the sustainability realm, a lot of site-specific performance work that I was working with, we were having lots of conversations around geolocation, and then that's what evolved into what has become actually a core part of my artistic practice now around augmented and virtual reality work, is that we were looking at like site-specific performance archive that was immersive, and started looking at how to combine geolocation and AR of performance so we could locate in place. A lot of the technology at the time just didn't really exist. or was hard to use. So we spent it involved spending a lot of time cultivating different expertises in what turned into 360 and game engines like Unity and Unreal, and how that integrates into show control. A lot of that has turned over now recently into how that connects with streaming work and digital scenography. Now those things combine together for screen-based experiences. And then in 2012, I was already in touch with York had started to integrate sustainability into their curriculum, and started up a master's program that was sort of rooted in that, and then had a search for faculty. And so I was already sort of connected to a couple of people there. And as that had been something that had become what now I'd refer to as echosonography, the core part of my practice, I ended up joining the faculty at York as full-time faculty as professor of ecological design for performance in 2012, and have been there since. And one of the strange things that happened along the way is that in immigrating for the first couple of years I was here until I got permanent residency, I wasn't actually allowed to, legally allowed to freelance. I couldn't work outside of the university. So I ended up cultivating even more of that mixed reality project, and now co-run a company called Toaster Lab, which is helping to support Level Up, but does a lot of explorations in terms of integrating mixed reality technologies with live performance, ranging from live events happening in VR or on screen. We recently did a workshop where we're using augmented reality in accessible and affordable ways for ASL interpretation for live shows, and all sort of different ways of pulling those things together. And then how that ends up being things that are opportunities for students to see what the opportunities in the field are. So looking at what the future practice is going to be. And then we've been trying to integrate that into the design and production program at York. I also teach in our devised program, so it's as open as people can be, so that we're ready for whatever happens next, especially now when we have no idea what exactly it's going to look like when we return to the ability to do anything in person, let alone anything that we would have previously called normal.
That's actually a perfect way to end off your little intro, because I could kind of segue into what I was going to ask as our first question to start to get our conversations going here. Specifically because we're coming at this Level Up Symposium from the context of working within the pandemic and the requirements that has placed on all of our jobs and creations. So I wanted to start off kind of with what have we been working with? What has changed from your educational practices prior to the pandemic to now? What new problems and new interesting discoveries have you made along the way? And what are we going to be taking from this time period now into the future? What new ways of creating and new ways of educating are going to persist into the future after the pandemic? I can kind of throw that at anybody.
Broadcast. I've been finding this year, I've been really lucky to still be doing my job mostly, although my job is shifted a lot, where I'm basically a one-person broadcast studio sometimes, and I'm finding, whereas before I was focused more on integrating images into a performance, I'm more disseminating the performance and working with cameras. How do we capture the performance in an interesting way? That's sort of, I mean, that's part of what I've been doing this year. I know there's a lot of other video designers that also have had that shift in their practice this year. So that for me, those have been new tools that I've kind of learned and picked up, and a new way of thinking about video in theater. And I'm interested in the future for kind of the development of this sort of new medium that's emerging, which is live cinema. Whereas theater artists are trying to make a dynamic performance online that's in between watching something from one camera view and just showing a film. They're trying to kind of do something dynamic live. I'm calling that live cinema. But for me, that's what I think is exciting. That's the exciting part that's kind of come out of this.
Yeah. I worked on did anybody here ever see or hear about that project, My One Demand, in 2015 with Luminato and Blast Theory? So it's basically a live film shot in Toronto and screened at TIFF at the same time. And it was all one shot. It was like a 10-second leg or whatever. But I was basically part of that team to do the research on the internet sticks to get that footage encoded and broadcasted out. And there was a poet kind of voiceover throughout the whole thing. And then, yeah, like I've been looking at, because of the teaching that I'm doing is all on Zoom. So I've been looking at a tool, I don't even know, maybe this conference is using this, Mimo Live. I've been looking at Mimo Live, like live streaming software that, you know, you can add in graphics, you could work with Siphon, you can do simultaneous broadcasting on Twitch and Vimeo and all that. And yeah, the idea of live editing and having different cameras set up that are basically maybe like a Zoom account, person's talking to the camera, there's scene one, goes over there, and you know, for narratives, right? So for fiction, goes over to the kitchen, and then there's another camera right there, and then the switcher is live switching. Like that's really exciting. Like that's bringing in all of the cool things of theater, that it's spontaneous and it's like, wow, this is happening in front of my face for me, while having one of the best things about film, which is editing out the parts you don't want or don't care to see. You know, it's so, that project was really interesting. And now that people are so used to talking in front of screens to box shaped people, it creates it's creating this new kind of newish kind of medium to tell stories, where you can do live switching and editing, and also have, like with Mimo Live, you can bring in the social media reactions, comments, and stats for real-time kind of interactivity. So you can have, you know, like choose your own adventure kind of thing. We're used to that. We've seen that before, but now it's all, we're meeting them where they're at. They're already there. And now the performance is coming to them through these boxes. So I think that stuff is really exciting.
It's interesting. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Matthew.
Oh, I was just going to say it's been a curious arc, I think, because I've seen so much interest in how do we solve some of the problems of just like Maz and Emily have pointed out, that, like, you know, we're in this strange semi-broadcast world where, you know, we are streaming information that's going outwards, but how do we create that feedback loop that's kind of inherent in the theatrical experience, where the performers get the benefit of the shared presence and energy from an audience? And what does that look like in a world that is streaming on Twitch or streaming on YouTube? How do we create that, you know, kind of avenues for that information to come back to the performers, so that it doesn't just feel like it is a, you know, why didn't we shoot this and just make a film? But, you know, how do we think about the interactivity and engagement that we can cultivate with an audience, so it doesn't feel like it's, you know, canned, but there really is someone that's responding and, you know, waiting on that comment or that poll to finish to kind of help direct what happens next. What I think has been really interesting there is there are so many different applications and tools that provide the intermediaries for creating these systems, that it feels much more democratized in many ways that I've seen previously. So things like OBS Ninja and OBS kind of giving you the handles to create the Zoom layout of your, you know, hopes and dreams, and think about what live compositing and kind of composing pieces looks like there, is, you know, way more accessible than if we rewind, you know, 2 years and think about, well, what's the entry cost of a broadcast desk and all of the pieces that go along with that to kind of teach these concepts. And now it's like, all right, well, you've got your laptop, so let's figure out how we can solve this problem, create a show, and engage an audience, even if we can't necessarily be in the same space.
That was I'm actually really glad that you went first, because that was like there is a similar preamble to sort of a phrase that I've taken away in sort of like what I've become interested in now, and where a lot of the conversations are going, is the way that and I think some people here might have also at some point collaborated with another designer named Jacob Nedzwicki, who he and I in discussion will refer to like the audience's ability to break the show. Like, how can the audience ruin the show is a question that we're grappling with, because you know, in back in June, I was involved in a streaming dance performance where we're like, our first goal was to break Zoom. Like, we don't want it to look like it's just happening on Zoom. And so like, it was like, well, we were already doing all this sort of remote and telematic performance work. Let's integrate that into what we're doing. And we had people like distributed throughout. But then, and literally we had one like public performance, and it was live, and it was the first time everything worked. And then, which was like nerve-wracking, and that was exciting. But then once everything worked, it's like, oh, why didn't we just record it? That exact question. And then the question came, it's like, well, where is the audience's place for interacting with it? And it's one thing where it's, you know, a Twitch stream or even on YouTube where there's like a chat on the, or even in the format that we're in now going through live stream, that there's a chat on the side, but that's not necessarily like influencing what we're having here. Whereas one of the things that I miss about the theater is that, like, you know, not that I'm expecting someone to come in and like use an air horn, but even just like coughing, the announcements to unwrap your candies before the show starts, like those little things that become this like social contract that you have with the audience, that are like really the edges of the digital space, that I think are really important places for us to be exploring right now, and part of what charges the environment that we're working in. And one of the biggest challenges was, I think, pedagogically, to be like, you know, we have a bunch of production students now who like didn't come to school to become video engineers, but they didn't not come to school to become video engineers either, right?
I can actually jump right on top of that. Ian, excellent lead-in. Thank you very much. Because I think, well, a couple ways I think NTS is privileged. One is actually the province we are in currently, which allows us to continue to work practical labs. So if we deem something practical and essential to the training that the students do, we can do it in person, which has meant we put on shows, 2 French shows, 1 English show, and we are moving forward to a bunch of shows this semester as well, that aren't performed in front of people. They're just performed in front of a class of students who are also pedagogically there to a witness. But it has meant basically that what we learned early on in the summer, that we all agreed that all 9 programs all agreed that we are not very much of a school if we can't meet in person and actually do theater together, that the training is different. And we didn't want to kind of shift to something else and do it no better than somebody else could do it. There are many, many other programs that could do that shift to a digital perspective much better than we could. And we have a particular expertise that we felt we needed to maintain. So our shifting has been really thankful that the Quebec government has kept us, the idea of training in school, super essential, which is not the case in many provinces. And so we are very careful. It's very complex. We've rescheduled about 50 times. Maybe that's, I think, an underestimation. But and with protocols everywhere, we do work in the theater, and we bring that technology. We do projection design in a theatrical setting, you know, with a director, with other designers, with actors on stage, as we've always done. What we've added is the live stream portion of it, because we didn't want to miss the moment to understand that this is an important part of our conversation from this moment on. From a year ago on, it's not going away soon. And to train it as best we can in small amounts is actually helpful. But it does require live streaming rights for the plays, which we don't always have. And we didn't have for our first production. So we just did a backstage live stream. And we had the stage manager be the kind of undercurrent of the show, and his call. We heard his call, and it wasn't a lot happening backstage, so it made it very kind of tricky. And one student was in charge of that, and had it was kind of, the result of it was really, really, really interesting. And I'll keep it. There's no question that it's going to stay, because it just prepares students more and more for that approach, and not about not doing it fully online, but about capturing what we can do in the room in some sort of way that it's interesting for those people who can't join us to see. So
okay.
yeah, we're in a very, very interesting place.
Can I hop onto that a bit in a way that actually addresses one of the questions that we just got in the chat that I saw the last one there, in terms of because I'm hearing something that's similar to sort of the like ultimately our choice or the way that we're moving forward, like and the question is, I'll go ahead and read it out for those who are watching who might not have seen it, but how do you teach practical approaches to technology that might radically shift in the next month, year, etc.? And I would say, like, that's always the question. Like, I feel like that's not a new COVID question. I feel like that is, and that's also one of the big shifts in my mind, or are things that with our students, that's like, I encourage them towards that, like, we're going to teach them stuff that is going to be out of date, perhaps like the next academic year, if not by the time that they graduate, definitely at some point early in their careers. And the more important thing seems to be, like, one, the adaptability and willingness, and then two, also, like, how do you learn a new thing? Like, how do you come to it? How do you start, like, the process of, like, getting yourself familiar with something? And I actually changed the question around towards, like, that pedagogical goal.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because it's so, we've had lots of conversations about students and practitioners who are trying to think about what's the intersection of XR or mixed reality in these formats, and how do I add layers of virtual or digital elements that are inside of this that are perspective correct from the perspective of the camera that's viewing the scene. And, if you understand the kind of mechanics of model-based projection mapping, right? It's the opposite. You just turn it around. It's not a projector out into the world. It's now your virtual camera that's moving around the world to help you have your perspective correct view. And so pieces that I've tried to lean into is that these concepts and ideas that you learn along the way that don't necessarily seem directly interwoven are actually often the same techniques that you use for other applications. You just have to approach them from an adjacent angle or from an opposite angle to think about, well, how can we use these techniques that already exist and then apply them in the domain that we suddenly find ourselves in?
And there's a limit to how much money institutions have to keep up to date. You kind of have to make a choice, and you stick with it for as long as possible until somebody says, here's a little bit more money. You can now update this technology. And then also the amount of time it takes just to teach core functionality of the technology, just the core need. What do you need to know? Like what Amelia is teaching in first year at NTS is really, what is a system? How do you just start to look at how a system is put together? What's the signal path? What's your critical analysis of this process? If you do that, and then the things that we say we can afford, we give you those programs, you learn those programs, you can kind of flip that into anything once you graduate. You make your own choices later on, but it's about understanding process, understanding how to take the technology, turn it into a design idea, and actually land it into something that that is witnessed or part of a whole storyline on stage. That's the actual work that teaches you the ability to have that conversation in many, many different ways. As technology gets more and more complex, you can't teach everything. It's frustrating to not be able to afford new gear, but institutions just can't. You make a choice, you stick with that choice, you teach that the best you can, and you hope that the process that comes out of it is transferable.
Got a really good question here. It's coming from following along a similar way. So it's saying that it's moving so fast in terms of technology changing that as soon as you teach something, it's out of date. So is it more about teaching a mindset rather than the technology itself?
I think so. I mean, just, following what Andrea just said, at NTS, we have some tools, but there's a lot that we don't have access to yet. And so I think I familiarize the students with certain concepts, different interfaces, different types of programming, in show control software. And I spend a lot of, well, not a lot of time, but an amount of time just exposing them to different methods. So it's like, okay, we don't have these giant media servers. We don't have a Black Tracks system for us to play with, but this is what it is. This is how it works. This is the scale of production that is using this technology. And now let's scale it down to the tools that we do have access to. And let's use those same principles, but with the tools that we have at our disposal. And from the theater world, that's what we're doing anyways. No matter how much money you have, we're always taking different tools and adapting them to our needs. And every show has different needs. So in that way, I don't find the technology limiting in a way. It allows you to be more creative sometimes. You know, obviously having big fancy toys is great, but it's, yeah, it is understanding those concepts and how they can be applied.
I think, you know, piggybacking off of that, one of the pieces that I think theater helped me appreciate as I kind of found my way into this particular space is appreciating that at the end of the day, it's really always a little bit of a magic trick and a little more illusion than perfect simulation and representation of how to do that thing in the physical analog world, right? There's always a little bit of sleight of hand involved. And when you begin to appreciate that as a kind of fundamental piece of how you work with technology, then it changes your relationship to it. You're like, well, maybe this isn't the right way to do it, but it's a way to do it that works. This is kind of like a tricky, hacky way to solve this problem, but it solves it for my production. And I think it's worth embracing those ideas that it's not about it being perfect and exact and the absolute, you know, only way to do it. It's, well, how do we solve it today?
Yeah. Yeah. What I've noticed making works like this and then is that the audience doesn't know how you made it. So if there's something that you shot, if you're a novice and there's something that you shot and maybe it was just with your phone, guerrilla style, and it doesn't have the resolution there, then there's things that can help you. Blend mode can be your friend. Filters can be your friend. If you have two different environments and the color temperature is way off from one to the other, you can't really reshoot it because the subject is not around or something, or you're ripping stuff from YouTube for like a community style show, then yeah, filters can help kind of even out the differences. And then sometimes with a lot of the stuff that I've done is interactive. So you have to ask yourself, does this really have to be interactive? Can I just be in the back pressing that key, like Wizard of Oz effect? So blending that with, in terms of mindset, going back to the question, it would kind of be like a technician, somebody that turns this into a vocation. A technician is somebody that can absorb those obstacles and keep going and keep trying to make it work. And there's, as you said, Matthew, there's different ways of making it work. So it's building that resiliency to kind of improvise and find the answers. There's big forums out there to help people out. And a big part of the motivation that can really help out, that helped me, was trying to meet people where they're at. Like if you're into this stuff, if you're into lighting design, if you're into projection design and hack and physical computing, I bet you're probably into sci-fi. Well, why don't we bring in the magic of that fictional world and remind you how cool this could end up? Because if you fall in love with the final output and you think, oh, I could have that byline, that could be me, and you reverse engineer that and you go right back to the beginning here, it'll help the student to be able to absorb all the hurdles that come with the technical hiccups, because there's so many, this firmware update, and I'm following this form, but it's just not working. And then it's so easy to give up this stuff with software stuff and you're sitting in your room by yourself during the pandemic. So reminding them of the romance of why you like this in the first place really can help out.
The new question that just came in, Andrew, can I address that? The sort of anxiety of that tech might replace something essential about theater, because I run into that kind of all the time. Basically, students will have anxiety over the sheer amount of work ahead of them. There is no end to the amount of stress that students can put on their work. I'd say that it's really more about helping artists of a different generation understand how to work with new technologies. And by that, for us, it's often the director who's coming in and they're always professional directors, and they may not want to work with the technology because it's just not something that they're used to. But in terms of this program with the video stream, we could teach at the computer forever and not ever put it on stage, but that's not real pedagogy. So I insist that every show that we do has projection in it, not because I think projection should be in every show at all, but that it completes the pedagogy. But then I also offer to directors who kind of go, I'm not sure. I just offer to them that at a school, this is your opportunity to think about how it could actually inform your practice, and just give you more information. And that's the excitement for me, as somebody coming into it open-hearted to kind of say, I'm willing to try something. And at the same time, the student kind of going, I need to, I want to, these are the things that I have ideas about. It's super interesting to watch. So I think there's stress in all kinds of pedagogy and learning and from everywhere.
Yeah.
But when you approach it as opportunity across the board, rather than this is not essential to theater, I think it's just way more interesting, fruitful conversation.
Yeah, if I can jump on that a bit too, because similarly coming, and I don't know if this is particularly like being within a school for doing things, but it's also something that comes up though. It's when we're doing shows and doing things, like the priority is on what comes out of it, and I agree. Like we want all of the elements in it, not just because like it's not just about the show that we're creating. One of the things say to my students, usually when we're much more comfortable with each other a little bit down the lines, I just sort of like take them aside and whisper in there. It's like, we're in a school. The point of, and maybe somebody's going to roast me for this in the chat someplace, but like, it actually might not matter if our shows are any good. Like the point of you being in the school right now is not to make it good. It's great if you can make it good. Like, great, good on you for making it good. But the point here is to like get used to the process, see how they integrate, experiment, learn what like the ways that you communicate ideas to other people, so you can communicate things to somebody who's trying to accomplish things. The way that like if you're trying to come at something that you haven't done before, that you have a process by which you can like find the pathway to do that, because sometimes it's just as important to know that something can be done and that that then you can outline the steps to get to that place, as opposed to knowing exactly how to do it, and that there's ways of discovering it. And when we extend our process so that we have the time for that investigation, so they like cultivate the practice of practicing, like they're playing at getting out there into a much intenser thing. But at the same time, it's not just balancing with like there's the anxieties around like I want to do something new and that's hard and I don't know how to do it, and they need to cultivate the practice of getting there. But also like for many of them, it's the first time they've done something at that scale, and that's one of the big anxieties that I know that I'm always facing, is that like somebody gets their first big lighting design and it's like, my career is over if I don't do well on this. And I was like, no one's going to define what you are out of here. And hopefully you get some good portfolio shots, but like, but it's their first show. So there's like always also the high anxiety of like doing something the first time, and fear that someone's going to think that you shouldn't be there anymore. So a lot of it is tamping that fear down so that they actually try something.
So the process of doing it is like almost more important than the actual
Yeah. And in terms of like outside of school and doing it as an artist, I mean, the anxiety, I mean, nothing's ever going to replace the human being on stage or in a box, and nothing is ever going to replace a good story. Like you go to like a Nuit Blanche show and there's an interactive thing, and there's a sensor in this light ball, and you watch how people interact. People flock to light at night like moths. It's just something that happens. And if there's music, they stay a little bit longer. And then you tell them it's interactive, and then they play with the thing, and then less than a minute they put it down and they leave. But what is going to keep people there is story. I mean, that's the fundamental thing. We're wired for stories. So theater is just that. It's a good story is the thing that you'll remember, that you'll linger in your head when your head's under the shower head the next day. Like, it's the thing that will get you to talk about it with your friends because it speaks to a universal theme. So the tech can only help you tell the story better or enhance it. And yeah, like in a learning context, it's like, yeah, like play with the tech until you break it, just so you can just feel the bottom of the pool. But in terms of when you're done school and you're living and you're making stuff as an artist, it has to be story driven and relatable to people. That's what's going to keep it timeless.
Yeah,
well, I think the other. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Andrew.
No, I was just going to. I'm not one of the panelists, so I was just going to say no. I would completely agree with that, and that's something that always comes back with these big tools and this really fun technology. It's always really fun to play with, but if you can accomplish the same thing in a much easier way, and it drives the story, that's where it comes out in the professional world. That's what's most important. So
I don't know the number of times I've said, if you end up with 5 things on stage that are perfect for the storyline, that follow the arc, that are dramaturgically important, it's so much more interesting than 20 cues that just happen for reasons that aren't deeply integrated into the story. I think I agree, it's really important.
Sorry, Matthew, did you have something to add to that?
Oh, I
cut you off.
It's an adjacent idea, but like I think that the anxiety that the technology is going to replace us, or it's going to edge out technicians or artists, is a very real feeling, especially in a world that's dominated by, presences of machine learning and our interaction with systems that are procedural, that they create themselves. That all of these pieces create very real anxieties about what is the role of the artist or the technician inside of those systems and worlds. As a person that has worked intimately, like I'm sure many of our panelists have, with those technologies, as soon as you spend more than 5 minutes with one of them, you realize that there is always going to be something that's going to break. There's always going to be a forum where you're asking some question about, well, why doesn't this thing work the way that it's supposed to? And this API call doesn't work with this thing. Like, the technology looks infallible from the outside, but as soon as you start to use it, you'll realize there will always be helping hands along the way that are imperative to make sure that you still produce something that's compelling and interesting.
This window didn't make itself.
Well, in everything, like, that's the progress of the technology as well, right? It's always evolving, and it's always adding new features and things like that make our jobs somewhat easier as people who do things with technology. Like, the amount that I can do with, like, name a media server that's available, like any of them, that like 10 years ago, yeah, like I said in my intro, like, I just remember, like, us getting these emails asking what the heck we were trying to do with QLab 2, and now we're on 4, and it does so many other things, and then moving to any other media server environment, like the number of things that they're capable of that used to be like, well, now I have to go away and render this, and it's going to take me 20 hours because I have to figure out how to do it. Or I do a lot of work with, like, and how that balances also with this question that we're talking about of, like, learning methods and process for interrogating things. Because I can point to sort of 2 examples with the work that we do a lot of work with 360 VR video. Right. And so on one hand, the technology advancing has replaced some of the work that we need, some of the jobs that are in it, because when we started doing it, none of the nonlinear editors like natively handled 360 videos. You'd have to do it through plugins or through scripting, and you'd have to do all of your, like, because you're working with multiple cameras that you're stitching together, you'd have to, like, do that by hand. And now much of that process has been automated so that, like, we can work much faster now. It's been integrated into those platforms. On the other hand, the cameras, like, the interfacing on them is so minimal that the most useful skill that I have from that is when I learned how to do analog photography. Because I have, like, if I understand the device and how to set it up, I have enough, like, I know from that process, like, you can build the confidence to work with that device with its limited amount of feedback and feel confident that you can go back to the computer, back to your editing, and actually be able to, like, believe that you're going to get something that's usable. And so it's like that balance of, like, and all of that again goes back to this idea of, like, how we're preparing with these technologies to do storytelling, because ultimately the advances of the nonlinear part of it allow me to get to the story that I want to tell faster. So I'm not sitting there doing, like, blending fisheye lenses together and waiting for that to render. That's got automated. And on the other hand, like, I can focus and understand the connection between that capture device, that camera, and the scenography and the storytelling of what we're trying to record. And that's the fundamental skill that I needed, not push this button to get this thing to happen.
So in that vein, do you think that the simplification of processes, or looking at the history of the technology that has gotten you to this point as part of your teaching practice, is important? Do you think it's important that people learn older programs, older technologies, in order to be able to learn what we're using nowadays?
Can I throw out a controversial, just, like, add-on to that I heard someone say
Please.
to me the other day? It, like, lives in my head rent free. And someone's like, because it was about this very question of, like, learning older technologies, and it's like, do kids today learn how to use a rotary phone? Like, do you need to understand how to use a rotary phone to be able to use a smartphone? And I don't have a, like, probably not in that situation, not. But if you extend it to, like, do you need to? It came up in a conversation about, do you need to know hand drafting to be able to move to CAD? It's like, there's like, maybe, but what is the time element to it? Are you actually going to be putting out things like that? How long are we going to be doing it? And someone's like, well, do you need to know how to use a rotary phone to be able to use a smartphone? And it's like, ugh. It's not a great analogy, but
I can start with a different analogy, because kind of related in terms of lighting design. You know, what old technology is conventional lighting, you know, non-intelligent fixtures that don't move and change color and do all kinds of things. As a lighting designer, you absolutely need to know how to use conventional, because you're storytelling. It's not toy time, right? And so, especially when you're learning, everything takes so much time that again, the core functionality of dramaturgically understanding how to bring light to the stage is more important than making sure you have the newest technology. That will come later. And for me, it's the same with the pedagogy around projection design, because we just simply can't always top up, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not that you have to teach old technology, you have to teach what you have, and then but bring it into the work, which is the process of providing something on stage that is rich, that is human, that is interesting. And that can be done with new or old equipment. That's the core of the work, is really the artistic creative side of it. And you can do a lot with a 10-year-old projector, right? It'll be brighter if it's the one you bought last week, and probably richer and lots of other things. But the image that's on will have the same context in the sense of how it's integrated into the story. So it's give and take, right? You're often not afforded the opportunity to just have what you want. You have to learn the core. You have to learn the skill set with what you have, and the importance of the skill set, and then apply it to wherever you can later on. And
I'm raising my hand because there are two thoughts that occurred to me, and I'll make them quick to not monopolize time, because I know I just spoke. But one is on a case study to support the old lighting technology analogy that you used, is actually the session that we had on Beyond Reality yesterday, talking about VR performance, that Beth Cates was on that. And I know a number of us know Beth Cates, and she was talking about, like, lighting design for a live VR production. Like, it happened all in VR. And so having to work with the developer, one, to invent lighting, that you could lighting design within this virtual space that worked in that theatrical methodology. She was like, yeah, and so we could have 3 static lights. So it's like that essential skill, like, we're moving to, like, the most advanced, like, from a technological perspective of distance performance, but, like, the key essential skill to making it work is actually that initial skill of, like, you've got 3 Fresnels where do they go to tell that moment in the story? I forgot what the other thing is. There's another thing I was excited to share. It'll come back to me.
Well, and I think, kind of piggybacking on both of those things, the concepts that are essential to some of our techniques, I think are some of the most important places to lean in as much as we can, right? Because you can teach projection design with an overhead projector. And that is often one of the most, that was one of the ways I first learned how to do it. And it really helped cement for me that, oh, the position of this fixture makes a difference for where it puts light on that object. And really, my job is really trying to think about reconciling both this 2D, flat plane that I have, and then how that lives on an object that's out in the world. So, sometimes understanding the conceptual framework makes it easier to say, okay, well, how do I transfer this idea to After Effects? Well, how do I think about this in the context of something I'm making in C4D? How do I, know that I'm working with something flat ultimately, but then think about how to manipulate the tool that I'm using in order to get that outcome? And I think that's where the technology that we're using at the end of the day maybe isn't as important as what are the techniques and what are the pieces I'm trying to convey? How am I trying to tell the story in a way that's compelling to my audience?
I'm just going to completely jump to a different thing. Let's just talk quickly about self-educators, because I know that there's a lot of people here that aren't necessarily in academia or haven't gone to school or don't want to go back to school and want to teach themselves. So let's just quickly ask, what suggestions do you offer? Like, what building blocks would you recommend to self-educators to start with, somebody who has no digital technology experience?
Something that helped me to get my head around, I don't know if systems is the right word, but I guess it is basically kind of like, this happens, this could happen, this will happen. If this, then that. So IFTTT. So basically, like, I think it's still free, or maybe they're doing
there's a free version of it. Yeah,
there's a free version. Good.
Yeah.
So yeah, basically what it will do is you'll log in with your different like Drive or your Google accounts or your social media or whatever, and you can say, if the temperature dips below this, then send out this tweet, and then take that tweet and put it into this Excel sheet on Drive. Or every time I listen to this Justin Bieber song on my Spotify, anything, it's connected to so many different platforms where you would log in and it keeps your data, and you can make this happen and that happen. So it's a cool way to kind of learn the concept of Internet of Things sort of thinking. And it gives you a little pat on the back. Like, it's very easy to do, and you could do some fun things. There's a lot of applets that are already there that you can just take. You can make your own. That's something that's kind of helped to learn about this, making that happen, then making that happen, and creating kind of like an artful experience for yourself.
I always encourage individuals who are coming to this from a kind of self-learning perspective is to really temper your expectation for the rate at which you are going to have achieved mastery of a particular domain. It can be really tempting to look at Instagram or look at Snapchat or look at TikTok and be like, oh, I'm going to do these 3 60-second, steps, and then, I'm a media designer. Well, be prepared for the fact that climbing the mountain isn't just like, I'm going to climb the mountain. It's like, whoa, I need to get a map. I probably need to collect some equipment. I should go on like a little hike first. I should be ready for like when all of my supplies spoil. What are the things out in the forest that I can eat, right? It's the journey that you're embarking on isn't about just getting to the top of the mountain tomorrow. It's about understanding, appreciating the pathway that you're going to take along the way. And that invariably is going to mean that you're going to be frustrated. You're going to feel defeated. You're going to have moments that are your highest highs and moments that are your lowest lows. I always, in grad school, tried to describe my learning process as a sine wave, that as soon as I was at the bottom of my feeling and expectation, like nothing was going wrong, within a day or two, that's going to turn around and you're going to start to make progress. And when you're at your highest high, it's worth remembering that at some point, something is going to go wrong. That's the nature of the universe and working with tools, is that something's going to go not going to be perfect. And that's okay. It's important to know that there'll be moments where you feel really accomplished and everything feels easy and effortless. And there will be moments when it feels like you can't get anything to work right. And both of those feelings are not only valid, but can exist in a world where you are still an accomplished creator and maker. That is an inevitable part of the journey of learning, is having moments where things are exceptionally wonderful and moments where you want to throw your computer in the waste bin and never look at it ever again.
Yeah, I think like the benefit, when I think about it in terms of like what are the benefits of being within an institution, it's very rare that, like, you can pick up skills anytime, and as we've talked about, like the skills are going to change at some point. Maybe like even if you go to school, like the benefits, if you get to it, in my mind at least, are like there's going to be some element of mentorship. Someone's helping you sort of guide in the process so that you don't have to figure it out on your own. There's a bit of a community there, whether or not that's a community of support or a community of people that you're collaborating with, etc. And some sort of and like in some contexts, some sort of analytical model for evaluating the work, right? You're going to be, whether or not you're just having casual conversations or you're in a more structured thing. All of those things like can be cultivated outside of that, like finding the community, if it's an online community, if it's a quote unquote in-person community or community of practitioners through like various groups. Like there's so much, especially with learning new skills, where people are trying to do things and are very generous with their like technical expertise and like problem solving ability. That some spaces for that can be more toxic than others. So you also have to be mindful of that, of like where you're going for technical knowledge and things like that. But if you can also tap into those communities and find people in those interest group, whether or not it's through social media or through pre-existing groups or just being out in the community and collaborating, like you can also cultivate those things there. And I think those are the things that like the school environment provides. Because the skills you're always going to have to come to, and you can go to, there's lots of like either instructions, some platforms have more explicit instructions for things than other things. If you have access to the things, or there's always lots of stuff on YouTube. I go to YouTube for stuff all the time now. Like people who are on the developer end of things copy code from everywhere. Like you don't have to, and I think I'd even reduce it down a bit. Like all of those things reinforce like, no, I don't think that anybody's expected to know everything. It's good if you have collaborators that understand what you're trying to do together and sort of the process that you're trying to accomplish together, but no one person in that group is ever going to understand every whole part of it. And so if you open yourself up to those sort of like networks, then there's a lot that you can accomplish regardless of what environment that you're in.
This isn't really tagging on to what you just said, Ian, but I think something for myself when I was doing self-learning was like, we talk about technology as this like great thing. And something that was really helpful to me was understanding that it's technologies. And there's places where these things connect and intersect, but that very often, you know, when you see a project, it's not one technology that you need to learn in order to execute that. It's like a whole bunch of different things, and that it's just like chipping away at those little things. And as part of that, it's well, I guess you just said this, like you don't have to be an expert at any of those things. Starting off, I felt like, okay, I got to be an animator. I got to do 2D. I got to do 3D. I got to be a filmmaker. I got to know how to code. I got to do all this stuff. And like, I did some tutorials, I did some processing, creative coding workshops, and I was like, you know, there's people who are way better at this than me, and I'm going to call them when I need help. And that, like, you know, that's just like, okay, I don't need to put the energy there because this is the part that I'm more interested in. This is what I'm more suited to. So I'm going to put my energy in this place. And I think that's where collaboration is super important, just knowing who to call upon. And like having a mentor, not in a formal way, but just being able to find somebody that you can say, hey, can I ask you questions when I get stuck? That is also helpful, because sometimes you can get yourself quite far and then you get to a place and you don't know how to get out of it. And I found just having somebody that I could share my project with and get their insight or their feedback, or they could point out where my error is, that allowed me to advance rather than getting kind of stuck in the bottom of my sine wave. So that, I don't know if any of that's helpful, but that's what I tried.
Mm-hmm. Andrea.
Yeah, I just wanted to offer along the lines of what everybody is saying, right? That often it's just applying so much patience to your own learning curve, right? And that you start in A and you want to be at M. You just want to be there because you see other people there and you want to do that thing. But there's so many steps that you have to learn to get there, and to just have patience and to enjoy that journey, I think that's pedagogy to me. Because jumping means you skip steps. You don't understand how one thing leads to the other, or how to change when you hit a wall, right? Do you go left? Do you go right? Do you go over? Sometimes you hit a wall and you don't know where to go because you don't understand the steps. So I would just encourage everybody to try and be patient with their own learning curve, but also with the technology itself, because it's a time eater.
Well, I love that reminder to be patient. I also, as a actor dancer in a former life, I also think about the way that you began every dance class was with your fundamentals. You start at the bar. If you're playing an instrument, you start with your scales, and you don't leave those just because you become accomplished. Often you go back to those essential practices and you repeat them over and over again, in part to help formalize and embed them in the way that you think about your practice and your discipline. So, just because you want to be at M doesn't mean that you won't go back to B every day of your practice for the rest of your practice, right? Like, you might still think about what's the right color palette for the rest of your time, thinking about how you use color. It's okay that there are those many steps, and often we go back to them many times.
Totally.
That's good. Thank you all. I wanted to really quickly, because we're coming up on our time, jump into the really interesting question that I really like that Matthew proposed in our pre-email session, but essentially saying it can be difficult to remember why things were hard when you first started, especially true with respect to mental models or concepts that you internalize with practice and repetition. So with that in mind, what's a dimension of your discipline area of expertise that's become invisible to you over time? And what could you have told your younger self that would have saved you the angst and frustration of learning concepts in your domain of expertise?
I know I wrote that question, but it feels so intimidating to have someone read it to me. I'm like, oh, jeez.
It's not an easy question.
I know for myself, when I was starting out, one of the things I was most fearful of was, okay, I'm going to get to the theater. I've convinced somebody to give me a job. I'm going to get to the theater. I'm going to plug all the things in, and it's not going to work, and I'm not going to know why. and I will be a fraud, and I will be exiled from the industry. And that would keep me up at night. And I now have a long list of all sorts of reasons why things don't work together, but finding out why is it that things don't work? Why is it when I plug something in that it doesn't just work? Where do these incompatibilities come from? And that, for me, that's where the history of how these technologies have developed is really important, because often the reason why things aren't talking to each other is because they're different generations. They support different frame rates or different protocols and things like that. So I don't know. That was something I was really fearful of, and something that I don't really think about anymore, because I kind of get it. And that it's not my fault if it doesn't work. It's the equipment's fault for not talking to each other, and that it's all figure-outable. If you Google enough things, you talk to enough people, you try every possible combination of things, eventually you're going to get it. So that's, I don't know, that's something.
one thing I'd say to my younger self would be embracing the principle of GE, you know, good enough. Don't be a perfectionist, because sometimes perfectionism, it's rooted in a fear of being unfairly criticized, or, you know, because you're making subjective stuff. This isn't, you know, people are gonna, and if it's artistic, then it can be very personal or identity based. So sometimes you have you can be very sensitive towards rejection. If they don't like this, then they must not like me. But I would say hitting that publish button, getting it out there, sharing it on Facebook with your friends, starts a conversation, and then they're going to give feedback. People are going to talk about it and be open to that conversation. And then when you're ready to do it again, or a better version of it, because now you might have more technical skills, or being able to do it in shorter amount of time with some overhead left over to make it better looking, just take that other version and unlist it, you know. So the principle of GE, I would definitely say, would be something that I would like to tell my younger self, and what I always try to tell my students. And then this is the other thing I was saying before about just remember that the viewer doesn't know how you made it. Mm-hmm. So blur the edges and mask it out, and blend modes and filters, and putting a blur on something and make it look like it's a better resolution, or increase the contrast, or whatever you're trying to do. Layer up the sound so they can't see that you didn't know at the time to take out the room noise or whatever it was. All those things can help you, because only you know, and you could take that to your grave with you.
I have a friend who won't watch at one point went to see a show that I designed something on, and then said, "I'm never sitting next to you again," because they could just hear me like a groaning because I could see all the mistakes. And they're like, "I have no idea what you were joking about," but it made it really hard to focus on the actual show. I like same sort of thing, like releasing yourself, like. I work a lot with students with like recovering their sense of play. I run into so many issues where students are trying to do things the right way the first time, and like not willing to do it. Adding to like, one, if you're going to get to ultimately what the audience is going to see, and you're satisfied with it, it's dramaturgically sound, you know, whatever, then you've done it right. Like it doesn't matter how you got there. There's like 25 million ways to get there. If the show is ultimately saying what you want it to say and looks appropriate for what you're trying to do, then you've succeeded. Same as what you're just sort of saying, Maz. And it's one of the things where it's like, it's like for many years, I like early as I was doing more and more video design, like it's like someone said, I remember like the second show I ever designed, Amelia, having that conversation and asking like my mentor, like, when does this go away? And they're like, oh, it doesn't. And having that feeling, but then like being terrified of After Effects, like very early in my career, because it's like the logic didn't quite at the time make sense to me. But then I just like ultimately needed a project, even if it was self-imposed, that like is like, this is what I want it to accomplish. And that's what created the mastery of it ultimately. And it's through that play. There's like a great definition of play that like came from like Carl Sagan, which is something along the lines of like learning to do something without any future like productive use in mind. That's like the more that you can do that and be open to that and just like do things over and over again, like the idea that it's more important to have repeated things, because every first draft is bad. And so as fast as you can get to that second draft, you'll be in good shape.
And that all speaks to me. It speaks to creative process, right? That, yeah, the first pass is the sketch. And then each time you have a new pass at it, you just step further and further back. So you can have a broader view, and you can catch things that are minute, focus over there, a bigger picture thing. I did something completely wrong. I got to flip it. And in successive views, you can understand how to creatively kind of dive deeper into it, even as you pull further away from the minutia of the work, right? And I also think of that too as kind of taking the ego out of the work, so that it's you're answering less about what do I need to happen and what is really truly supposed to be inside this story, right? And Ego's not a bad thing, but it can get in our way in a creative process too.
If I can,
really far away from the question. I'm sorry, but I just wanted to take.
For some reason that reminded me, but like I think about drafting also because a question came up about drafting. But like I think about drafting, and one of the things that I encourage, that I'm constantly in conversation with my students about is like, there's not necessarily a right way to draft. The right way to draft is the way that you are able to communicate to the people who have to create the thing that you're going to make. Like, so it's about the communication that comes along with it. So there are conventions that people are used to, and there is ways that it could be clearer that are relatively common and things like that. But it's not necessarily that it's right, that it's like correct, that it's like an F versus a G. It's like, are the people that you're handing that drafting to, be they carpenters or technicians of any kind, or just other collaborators, do they understand what you're asking them to do in the system that you're trying to create, and what you're trying to have them do from that documentation? And that sort of like shift in thinking is the thing that I wish that I had released myself from earlier. It's not just like, I can do beautiful drafting that nobody understands, or I could do like something thrown together, but if it accomplishes the goal, which one is the more useful documentation?
I think back to when I first started, and piggybacking on many of these ideas, I had this like notion that there were right ways to do things, and there was a kind of infallibility to the technology, whether it was hardware or software, that I was working with, and that if something went wrong, it was like I was the problem in this equation, that I didn't understand how this thing worked, or I didn't understand how to plug the things together. And one of the pieces that I'm reminded of constantly these days is that the hardware and software that we use are byproducts of human beings. They are created out of a humanitarian process, right? Like there are humans that have made them along the way. And so software and hardware have an ideology. They have a perspective on the way, the paradigm they fit into, or how they want to be used in a particular way. And I think understanding the ideology of the systems or the tools that you're using can often be really instructive in releasing you from some of these notions of, where the fault might be on the, designer that hasn't thought about how the tool works, or maybe the tool just isn't intended to be used in the way that you're thinking about it. And there might be tools that are a better fit for the way that you want to work or approach what you're trying to communicate or create. And so remembering that these systems are made by people, they are not faultless or flawless. They are probably full of flaws that are yet to be exposed. Because like Ian pointed out, someone hasn't poked at them in the right way yet in order to submit that ticket, that like, this thing's broken over here. I don't know why that's not working, right? Like that's a part of the nature of the tools that we use.
Ghosts in the machine.
Exactly.
So does anyone have anything else that's been like itching at them that they wanted to say, you haven't had a chance to say it, now or never? No.
That's a lot of pressure. Final word.
It's a final word. Who wants to
hold your peace?
I would just add that I'm continually impressed and given energy by the students who are out there learning all of this, by all of you. I mean, I think your approaches and your articulation of your approach is really exciting, and I think that there are so many amazing individuals out there who are diving into the work like this with real heart and real understanding that it is more than the technology. It is so much more than that, right? We get lost sometimes in talking about deeply inside the technology, which is important. But until we have conversations like this, where the context of it is also discussed, I fear a little bit where theater will take that. But I'm again, I just am impressed and happy to hear everybody speak so articulately about their work.
Yeah, the symposium is called The Dramaturgy of Digital Performance and Design. It's not about the technology of digital performance and design. So yes, I think it's really interesting and refreshing and great to have you all here to hear your thoughts on how we keep it story driven and big picture as opposed to about the tools themselves.
Yeah, and one piece of advice I would give to any profs, especially in higher academia, is just like try to cut out academic jargon as much as you can when you're trying to convey this stuff, because the tech can be intimidating enough, but when we wrap it in a sort of kind of like insular language that may not translate to somebody more on the outside looking in, it can do one of two things. It can either alienate and be like, okay, well, that stuff doesn't sound like it's for me because I don't really get it the first go. Or it can do this sort of kind of assimilation where younger generation, especially first generation Canadians, would kind of assimilate to a certain kind of language that isn't the sort of language that they would use with their friends and family. But what's really cool about their newer perspectives is the stuff that happens behind closed doors. So it's kind of this weird, through elitist talk of kind of like a cultural segregation that happens naturally, that's like self-imposed. And I can relate to that a little bit from my experiences too. So just kind of like trying to say it in a layman, like do what you need to do for a grant and stuff. But trying your best just to say it in plain language that your mom would understand. You know?
I'm not sure that the grant readers understand the language either. So, from my experience, at least, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah,
I think the human element is all important in this and in the work that we do and in the design that we do. I think it comes down to that. It's not so technological, not so high there. So that's great. Thank you for that. That's a great word to end off on. So thank you everyone for joining. This has been really enlightening, really wonderful conversation. And I'm so happy that you were all able to do this and all able to join us here today. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Andrew.
This was great. I had a lot of fun.
Thank you.